We are going to kick this off. Welcome, everyone, to the Food and Innovation panel. I'm Kara Nortman. I'm your moderator. I'm a partner at Upfront Ventures. We are the largest venture fund based here in Southern California and invest in and around food and ag tech. And I'm going to start off by just having each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into questions from me. And at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience if we have time. All right, Jordan, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name's Jordan Gaspar. I'm a managing partner of AccelFoods. We are a specialist fund that solely invests in packaged food and beverage brands that are distributed direct to consumer or through brick and mortar channels. All consumable brands. Some great companies that we've partnered with are Harmless Harvest and Four Sigmatic and Koya, Siete Foods. We have a prioritization around infrastructure. Really work with our founders to build out solid infrastructure to help them scale. And I'm really happy to be here, so thank you.
I'm Jeff Housenbold, managing partner at SoftBank Vision Fund. We're the largest venture capital fund in the world focused on amplifying our entrepreneurs' ambitions as they change entire new industries with innovative business models powered by AI and big data. I oversee our consumer and real estate practices and have had a passion around food for quite a long time, spent a lot of time thinking about ag tech and technology across the entire sector. I've made some investments in Brandless, Plenty, and DoorDash, to name a few. And prior to that, I've spent the last 25 years in consumer internet, running a company called Shutterfly for the last 12 years. Before that, executive at eBay, AltaVista, and Raging Bull.
Excellent.
No intro for you?
Well, I gave a little bit. I guess at Upfront, we're seed and Series A investors. We're investing out of a $400 million fund, and it's across consumer, enterprise, and what we call frontier tech, and ag tech and food tech often fit into that bucket. So as an example, one of our companies we funded at a very early stage that's gone on to do some very innovative things with a lot of capital is a company called Appeal, which coats the outside of fruits and vegetables with an organic compound to dramatically extend the food life. Back in the day, I worked at IAC for many years and ran a website called Urban Spoon, so started out in the restaurant space, and now I'm the one up here that invests across multiple categories. Well, I guess you too.
I'm Jason Karp. This is my first year here wearing a private equity hat. I recently retired from the hedge fund industry after 20 years. I'm now the co-founder and CEO of a company called HumanCo. We are a mission-driven holding company that invests in consumables that are healthier versions of commonly consumed items. My largest investment, which I started with my family, is a company called Hu. It's Hu Products and Hu Kitchen, and last year we were the fastest growing chocolate company in the United States.
And it's really good.
Really good.
And good crackers now.
Grain-free.
Grain-free crackers.
Sanjeev Krishnan, S2G Ventures. We're a food ag fund. We do the whole value chain from genetics and crop protection all the way to brands and restaurant retail concepts. Have about 40 companies in our portfolio. We're also multi-stage, so we do seed stage, venture stage, and growth stage. And we do have a mission mandate about moving the U.S. food system towards sustainability and health.
So I'm gonna kick it off by talking about the capital markets and each one of our panelists' approach to investing. So I think most of us know the amount of capital going into food and ag in tech over the last 5 years has just exploded. So we have close to 10x the amount of capital, almost double the number of investors. You have everyone from traditional institutional funds to family offices. Smart money, maybe less smart money, everyone has an opinion. And what I want to do is kind of go down the line here and ask each of you a set of questions about how you're investing. And so Jordan, let's start with you. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about the profile of the companies you invest in, the stage, and then specifically I'd love you to get into how you think about brand, how valuable brand is in the CPG and CFG space these days in a world with big platforms, big private label, et cetera.
Sure. So we invest in companies that are pre-revenue up to generating $50 million in revenue at the time of investment. The rounds can be anywhere from $1 million financing up to the largest financing to date was a $90 million financing that we participated in. So a nice wide spectrum there. We say that we're inflection-based investors. We're looking for a specific moment in time that we feel that our resources are value add, and it's the right time for us to partner with the companies. And the companies are located nationwide with a concentration in the New York area as well as in California. All healthy living directed brands, and the companies, are typically, the profile should be 100% growth year over year. We're looking for fast growing opportunities. For us, as I said, we're an infrastructure-based approach, and we prioritize, really kind of looking through the companies and thinking about the supply chain optimization, the 3-year sales plan, channel strategy, brand optimization, thinking through long-term dilution plans for the founders, and bringing in strong co-invest partners alongside us, because we do believe in halo investing. I think that in terms of the priority of brand, we solely prioritize brands, and I think it's an interesting time for us. And I spend a little bit of time with the Brandless CEO, and we are, from our vantage point, we do discount private label business in our companies, and that's because we are looking to build brands, and authentic brands that are really shaped by founders who are telling stories. It is our perspective that is where the next generation of food is coming from. It is unique, sort of proprietary businesses, stories that are authentic, that are founder-driven, where somebody really has built community. And so with that comes, that when we see private label business on, the P&L, we do discount it. And so I think that from our perspective, the revolution in food really is going to be built on, sort of these new names and new brands that are coming to the market. You'll see if you walk into any retailer now, the shelves are saturated, and so it gets even more challenging. And so brand positioning is even more important, and sort of the articulation, whether it be using your own platform or how you're using your social media channels or your influencer network.
And so maybe, can you give us maybe one example from your portfolio of, a particularly on-trend, exciting brand, and how much of their expertise fell in the supply chain and food production side when you invested, and whether that was important?
Sure. So Four Sigmatic is, probably one of the companies in our portfolio that, people ask us a lot about. We invested the company with sub $1 million in revenue at the time of identification. It was a Finnish team, and we re-domiciled them to be US-based. It's a mushroom-based platform in functional coffee. So it's mushroom coffees, matcha, charcoal lemonade, and it's all powder-based beverages that at the time were sold online. And so it wasn't until the company built a $10 million business online that they even pursued traditional brick and mortar retail. And I would say that, part of the, for us, we used to call them the weird ones. Those were the ones where there were these unique ingredients that people really questioned and challenged, and the investors, would call us and say, how could you invest in a mushroom business? But mushrooms are, one of the, I believe, the third most studied ingredient by the medicinal community or the medical community, and each varietal mushroom has a different health benefit. And so there's a perspective that mushrooms are an alternative to traditional medicine. And so as baby boomers are aging, the nutritionists are starting to advocate for mushrooms to be included in sort of the daily regimen of the population. Obviously, there's the cool factor for millennials, and they're buying the products online. There's the Mushroom Academy and the mushroom community. It's a very hot brand. You go into Venice, you've got the Shroom Room. It's a pop-up. There's now going to be the Shroom Room in New York, and I do think that they built the business on brand and really kind of shaping a community. With that came, needing to catch up on the supply chain, and that's sort of where we came in and where we said we need to make sure, as we're building out this amazing direct-to-consumer base, that we also have the infrastructure. And so there's been a massive expansion into 6 co-packers this past, I'd say 18 months. But, a company that, 4 years ago barely existed is now probably one of the biggest targets in the space for acquisition. And it really is, no longer considered to be a weird one, but on the forefront of innovation in the space.
Wonderful. Jeff, shifting over to you. So I'm sure a few folks in the room have heard of SoftBank. No laughs. Gosh, you guys are a tough crowd. Would be great. You sit on boards across multiple different industries, including some very large real estate-oriented companies, as you mentioned, like Compass and Open Door and the like. I'd love to kick it off with you by just sort of understanding, how do you think about how are the investment parameters different when it comes to investing in the food world? Are there things, given the amount of capital you put to work, you stay away from? What are the key signals you're looking for? And then maybe at the end we can get into your personal story.
Sure. So SoftBank, our minimum investment size is $100 million. So we're looking for companies that need capital either to derive the R&D, to distribute globally, to create infrastructure. So real estate is capital intensive. A lot of food and agriculture is capital intensive. You need to have large distribution channels to be able to monetize and amortize your fixed costs. So those are two industries that are really interesting to us. But what cuts across all of our investments is really the use of data. And so how are these companies using data as a comparative advantage? Is it informing their product roadmap? How is it informing their go-to-market strategy? How is it informing their customer acquisition strategy? So I'll give you a couple examples. We invested in Brandless, and make no mistake, they are building a brand around Brandless, but they're a direct-to-consumer platform. Most CPG is going through traditional retail, and even the retailers have limited EDI data, and they're making almost no decisions from that. So if you look at Kroger or Safeway, the number of people, I think half of Americans have a Kroger loyalty card. They do almost nothing with that data. But Brandless, because they're direct to consumer, and they know exactly what you're putting in your cart. They know your age, your demographic, your psychographic, because you've built an authentic relationship with that community, and they want to tell you things so that we could personalize both the food, the products in the basket, and the web experience for you. So they're using data to inform new product introductions, informing which channels to reach people, and how to connect with the community in a more authentic way. DoorDash. When you go to, for example, OpenTable to make a reservation, it knows you ate at a restaurant. It doesn't know what you ordered at that restaurant. DoorDash knows exactly what you ordered. You got the penne arrabbiata, and I got the meatballs and spaghetti. And I know exactly the frequency of which types of cuisines you order, how far they are away from where you're sitting, is that work or at home, and they're using data to inform restaurants, to tell restaurants, you know what, other restaurants in the East Coast who are sub shop are doing really well with this type of sub. You should add that to your menu. So as a three-sided marketplace, they're using data to inform the restaurants who generate more revenue and throughput in their fixed asset called the kitchen. They're helping the consumer choose better food and give more variety. And they're helping their dashers make more money because of the data they're using for efficient optimization in the routes. And then if you think about Plenty is taking what is a manufacturing process outdoors and bringing it indoors and using technology in a full stack solution to be able to create the same output of a traditional farm in 1/350th of the space with 1% of the water, with no pesticides, with no GMOs, with a taste profile that is out of this world. I hate kale. And you taste the Plenty kale, they serve it in bowls at the board meetings, and it's like potato chips. It's all gone when you're done. So we're going into university libraries, seed libraries, and germinating seeds that haven't been grown in America in over 200 years. We have dulled our taste profile. You guys buy organic in the grocery store in a clamshell. You ever see the green slime on the bottom of it? Because it only has a 5 to 7 day shelf life by the time it gets there. You probably also don't know your lettuce and your spinach is washed through 3 different bleaches, even though it's organic. In Plenty, we have the opportunity, forget farm to table, for you to be able to pick your own produce next door to the grocery store. So our vision is to put hundreds of these around the US and thousands around the world, where we're growing at a much quicker rate with higher nutritional density at a cost that is lower than organic. So it's really interesting that we're able to give these companies the patient capital to be able to develop those technologies and not have to worry about near-term profitability, but to think about building a truly generational type of company.
Oh, that's super helpful. And I'm on the inverse of that, I'm curious, are there certain parts of the ecosystem that you guys stay away from because you think they either don't have characteristics that fit with those that you described, or too much capital may slow them down for some reason?
Yeah, it comes back to this notion of technology and data. So let's say you have a company who makes an amazing fruity, bubbly water, right? There are a lot of them. And you can make a lot of money because my 3 teenage kids are going through a case of these a day, right? But there's no technology. That would not be an investment that would fit our kind of thesis.
Got it.
Could be a great investment for others and a great brand, and I'll be a happy consumer, but not a SoftBank investor.
Perfect, perfect. We'll come back to your personal story in a bit. Jeff, so Jason. You recently made a big shift from the hedge fund world to the private equity world, and I think we know a little bit about what you're doing, but why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about sort of where you hope to be in the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, the genesis of HumanCo really came from two places. It came from my own personal journey, where basically since my early 20s I've struggled with several autoimmune diseases, and I ended up curing a few of those diseases in my early 20s through food and lifestyle, after all modern doctors told me they could not be cured. So that sort of gave me a different perspective about food as medicine, and that kind of became the personal journey. And then and that's what ultimately led me starting Hu with my family back in 2012. And then from an investor's perspective, it's almost impossible not to notice what's been going on in the landscape of large food companies and large, what I'd call, consumable CPG companies, which also includes personal care, that in the last 10 years, $18 billion of market share has been lost in the top 25 CPG companies. And in the last 3 years alone, of the top 100 CPG companies in the world, 90 have lost market share. 90. And so as an investor, I looked at it and said, where's that going? And it's going to challenger brands. It's going to these younger, smaller brands. And the problem is that people have lost trust with big food, and people have lost trust with some big CPG that isn't food, but it's mostly food. And it's actually odd because there's other categories like technology or automobiles where scale is associated with trust. If you think about Tesla, you think about Apple. These are extremely large companies. People trust the quality. They actually want them even more as they get bigger. But in food, there is now a perception that's been, I think, rightly earned over the last 10, 15 years that big is associated with bad. And the genesis or the main tenet of HumanCo really comes back to this concept of within food and within things that we consume, trust has been lost. There's no real trusted voice. Most of the stuff that you read or hear about in the media is not based on science. Are eggs good or eggs bad? Is fat good? Is fat bad? And every week, stuff is published to get clicks, and it's not based on actual science. And I think there's this enormous opportunity to restore trust in consumables. And what we did with Hu came from a personal perspective of basically creating a snacking company that has ingredients that everyone can trust and rely on. This was how I had to eat for a long time. Our products are vegan. There's no dairy. There's no gluten. There's no refined sugar. There's no additives. There's no chemicals. There's no soy. And it's actually possible to make products across a wide variety of spectrums without using all these adulterants that add shelf life or add taste or try to addict you to their products. And we think that there's this enormous opportunity to restore trust, and that there actually is the possibility to build a company with scale that actually has this ethos across a variety of products, not just snacking. And that's what ultimately led us to starting HumanCo.
And do you plan to build companies, buy companies? Yes? Both?
So the general idea with a holding company versus a fund is that you generally have control of most companies, and I think there's a great opportunity to actually share resources between different kinds of companies, whether it's shared ingredients or shared marketing or shared financial, like finance function. And so the bulk of what we want to do is control, but over the last 10 years or so, myself and several of my partners through our family office, we've invested in a number of companies in a minority level where our goal is to either eventually have control or to just stay minority, but it's something that we think helps the overall HumanCo ecosystem.
Great, thank you. So Sanjeev, jump in here. You probably cover the broadest range of theses and points in the ecosystem. How do you think about where and how to put your time, whether it's the supply chain side, the actual creation of new food products, distribution, Share with the folks how you're going about investing.
Yeah, so I think we're very intentional about portfolio construction. We have about 40 companies, and our anchor is the consumer and the changes they're doing. But we still think the U.S. food system is rooted around affordability, consistency, safety, convenience, which is why we participate across the value chain: genetics, crop protection, fertility, ingredients, processing, and logistics. The reason we want to do that is if you think about, we really have two food systems in America. And I think if we actually want to deflate that supply chain so that from a unit economics perspective, more Americans can afford these brands. Because one of the things we see, we have about 12 brands in our portfolio, is at a certain price point, they may be more relevant in certain channels, like natural channel or specialty channel. Clearly, they're getting interest in the mass channel, but that velocity is going to be, it can be accelerated in our view if supply chain catches up to where the consumer is. So we spent a lot of time in our portfolio kind of understanding the system effect of how do we deflate supply chains to help these brands grow even further and build more affordability in them. So I think that's one way we do.
Can you give us a quick example of one that fits into that approach?
So we actually do a lot in sort of perimeter brands. So we have a business that's in the poultry space. If you look at organic grows at say 8 to 20%. Overall food grows at 3%. The fastest growing category in organic is actually poultry. So we invest in a company that if they're 5x in revenue, they're actually cash flow positive. They're growing their revenue, but their feed costs are 67% of their costs. And so we have a number of portfolio companies, sort of an organic grain keiretsu, if you will, the genetics, crop protection, fertility, that actually help that portfolio company move their feed costs from $450 a ton to $270 a ton. By doing that, they can either acquire more market share or increase their gross margin. It's a bit. They're doing both at the moment, or a bit of both. And so that's one example of sort of how we try to integrate some of these supply chain dynamics, because the other thing we do is spend a lot of time with corporates. So we have about 110 co-investors, half of them who are strategics. A lot of those strategics we spend time with I just bought Annie's. And Annie's, we want to take them from 8,000 stores to 20,000 stores. That supply chain doesn't exist unless the price per unit economics increase significantly. And I think that's you're going to see increasingly is a lot of the M&A that's happening in the CPG space, which is driving a lot more risk capital into this space. Some of those companies are getting valued at software type multiples because the thesis is you get SKU extensions, you get distribution velocity. I think one of the things they're realizing is the supply chain there to meet some of those specialty ingredients that are not in high supply.
Great. So, one of the things that's come up is sort of the complexity of this ecosystem, and it's a market, and unlike, say, traditional software, where you can hire a bunch of developers, it's all bits. Food involves atoms, supply chain, non-shelf stable, material science. So it's one of the more complicated places in theory to put growth capital and risk capital. And so one of the things I'd love to dig into now is how you each think about strategics, big food, when you partner with them, when you go head to head with them, what that does for your brand. Can you hit scale without them? But how do you advise your companies to work or not work with strategics? Whoever would like to kick it off.
I can do it. So we have 36 portfolio companies of all different types of sizes, and we actually are very open to co-investing with strategics, both retailers and the multinationals. I think it all comes down to structure, and it comes down to what the long-term partnership path is. And so, one of the things that we've seen is that there's a variety of different ways that these partnerships can occur. So you can have a capital infusion, which is great. But as we all know, there's a lot of capital in the space. The idea of partnering with strategic is that you're going to have actual resources. And so what we're seeing increasingly is distribution on the table as part of the partnership. And that becomes one of the core questions. If the strategic's willing to offer distribution support, it immediately changes the opportunity for the company. And we'll see varying ways that could occur. Some strategics will say, we're willing to distribute up to 10% of your revenue. Others will say, we want to come in as a core partner on the retail side. So it just depends there. The other thing is that we'll be thinking about, like other investors, is what's the long-term ownership structure? And we're seeing, obviously, calls are being put on the businesses. Very rarely do you see a put. And so the structures are getting very complicated. And what people probably don't realize is that more and more of these young, authentic brands are getting gobbled up early because of these minority investments. And so for us as venture capital investors, we can get more comfortable probably than private equity might be able to be in terms of partnering with a strategic, because from our perspective, we've come in early and we're able to achieve a great return for our investors by going straight to strategic. I think it gets a little bit more challenging when the companies are sort of in the range probably where you guys are, where you're going to see there's going to be a big curve in terms of the upside opportunity. But strategics are becoming a huge part of this ecosystem, one that really didn't exist in the same way several years ago. And so, we always say that when we first started, and it was only 5 years ago at this point, VEB for Coke was obviously, operating very successfully, but there really weren't a lot of strategics in the space. I'd say at this point, almost every single food company or large food company in some way has developed a corporate venture arm. And it's a question of what operational resources they're willing to offer. Is distribution part of that calculus? And then what's the ultimate structure to make sure that if you build value, you will ultimately be the partner of choice for that company?
I think we work a lot with strategics. Generally, it's been very good. I think one of the, we invested in Beyond Meat 5 years ago. When we explored the Tyson investment, we thought it was hugely a validation of that sector. We never thought that they would eventually launch their own plant-based brand. It obviously validates the opportunity set. So I think it's sort of how, to your point on structure, is very critical. Like as followers, yes, not leads. And then two, just even the follow, just highly structure it, because I think I've been in the space since 2003, I've never seen strategics lean into this thesis more than I have. A lot of it, I think, is defensive to learn. But eventually, if some of them go on offense and it conflicts with your go-to-market or your own brand positioning or your exit ability, I think you have to be really careful of how you do it.
And I know you have a perspective too. I mean, I'd love you guys to hit on, and maybe you can hit on it as well. When you're taking capital from a strategic, is the value add either on co-packing or food safety or distribution, whatever you're bringing that strategic in for, is it not just there, but is it lined up with the operating speed of the company such that the pluses outweigh the minuses? And I don't know if that's where you were going.
Yeah, so with Hugh, we sold a minority stake 2 weeks ago to Mondelez International, and it was a very long process. It was deliberate, and I think the role of strategics has changed a lot in the food space in the last even 5 years. As Jordan mentioned, every major food company has started a VC arm. Their organic and better for you food is the only segment of the grocery store that's growing. And so there is a lot of defensiveness in nature to why they're doing this. And I think it's a very difficult tightrope that many of the big food companies are walking, because many of them have big legacy brands that are not good for you, and those are the bulk of their cash flow and the bulk of their business. And the smaller companies just don't move the needle for them, and they're hoping that in partnering with some of the challenger brands that they're going to learn some know-how, they're going to learn some things that they don't have, and then hopefully they become big enough that they can move the needle. For us, we were courted by several players in the space, and we're mission driven in terms of one of the goals of what we do at HumanCo is we want to make healthier foods more trustworthy and also more accessible to the masses. And the problem with healthy food right now is it's expensive, and it's also not accessible from a distribution and breadth perspective. And we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and the only way that I think to really affect change in any time frame that's meaningful is to partner with some of these larger players who actually do care. And what I would say, and I've actually been publicly outspoken against big food in the past, and through our due diligence and the number of meetings we had with several players, several of them are really changing. They really want to change. They really care, and they're struggling with this difficult conundrum of meeting shareholder demands of profitability, which generally includes shittier ingredients, longer shelf life, et cetera, and actually trying to help people. And there are a handful of companies that we believe are moving in the right direction.
Can you discuss some of the ones that maybe are good examples and how they're moving past near-term?
Yeah, and I'll give examples of ones that aren't.
Okay, give them to us.
So most of you, or many of you in the financial space, probably saw about a month and a half ago, Kraft Heinz blew up spectacularly. They're someone who's not. They're trying, or recently just started trying, but this 3G, zero-based budgeting, cost-cutting mindset does not work well in quality food. And the reason is that people actually care what they're consuming, and they care about the practices that are used. And there are some industries where cost-cutting, to the bone, actually is probably good for business. I believe that food is not one of those. Food is something where quality matters. And what's remarkable to me is that if you look at countries like France and Italy, they take pride in food. They actually have disdain for cheap food. And by cheap food, I mean like gross cheap, not low in price. And America, for some unfortunate set of circumstances over the last 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years, we have been taught to revel in cheap food. And the fact that, when McDonald's debuted their salad, probably 15 years ago, it was $6. A cheeseburger was 99 cents. I mean, just think about the insanity of that. A fruit cup was more expensive than a cheeseburger. Like, that shouldn't be the case. And so the companies on the good side of the ledger are Nestle's trying to do a lot in this space. Mondelez, we believe, is really trying. The last two acquisitions they made were Tate's Cookies, which is a much better version of some of the other cookies in their portfolio.
A mini bar staple, if you will.
And they also bought Enjoy Life, which is an allergen-free snacking company. Nestle's done a bunch of things. Mondelez is doing some great stuff. I think Unilever's really trying. And now, what, as investors, I would say is that everyone needs to have some of these growthier things in their portfolio, but you actually have to interview the management and understand, are they really doing this because they understand why they need to do it, or are they just doing it because they think this is what investors want?
Great, thank you. Jeff, how do you think about strategics? You give companies enough capital that maybe they don't need to think about strategics, or you don't want them to think about strategics? I'm curious.
No, we're largely indifferent. We value the broader ecosystem of players. You look at, we just partnered with GM on Cruise, right? So that's an example where you have strategics coming in. I think it's what the panelists said. You want to get the benefit from a strategic in their distribution, in their food safety, maybe in their food science, but you want to structure it such that you're not limiting the future outcome for the company. Mm-hmm. And so we welcome strategics who can add value. We kind of like them to have less than 10 or 12% of the company so that they have an important benefit, but not an outsized say, particularly in the food space. So it's really a case by case.
Do you think ultimately that companies that are collecting data directly should also be building relationships with other more traditional forms of distribution, or do you keep them focused on direct-to-consumer entirely?
Generally keep them focused. So part of that pattern recognition, when I was at Shutterfly, we were direct-to-consumer competing with these little companies called Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Costco, HP, AOL, Yahoo, Microsoft, Facebook, just to name a few, plus 11,000 venture-backed companies in the space. And I thought what really differentiated was our relationship with the customer. We had your photos, we knew who was in it, we knew it was grandma's birthday or 50th wedding anniversary. It was the power of data to personalize, to create a set of products and services that touch people's hearts, not just their pocketbooks, and to build an authentic brand that was emotional and aspirational, not just rational and functional. And so I believe that getting disintermediated from your customers is long-term problematic in building a great brand.
Yep, wonderful. We'll go to the audience soon. One kind of last topics I want to do up here, and I'll cut us off if we go too long. Really this idea of trust, big food, small food, it comes up in a lot of different ways, right? Dense farming, et cetera. I think one of the challenges with food, health and wellness, the trends we're talking about is consumers don't know necessarily what to trust, and the science feels like it's moving quite a bit. How do you guys think about what defining trust? That could play into, does organic and natural mean anything? Does the way it's farmed mean anything? Are we still just sort of greenwashing our packaging and patting ourselves on the back and moving forward? And what is our responsibility to go all the way down to the beginning of the supply chain to really certify trust?
I mean, I think there's an arbitrage of trust across the food system. So the consumers clearly are not trusting, particularly the younger consumers are not trusting traditional brands. If you go in the opposite of that value chain, a lot of farmers don't trust startups just because, will you be around and do you know my business and you're in California or wherever you are and you're coming to Iowa. So there's an arbitrage just across the value chain. I think, to me, some of these things like organic is just, these are placeholders for distrust. One of our entrepreneurs said, blockchain will eventually replace organic because it's just a placeholder. And I think one thing that a lot of the things we do, we have a debate on whether it's a trend or a fad. One thing that seems pervasive across the value chain that, sort of from ag input to retail seems to rely on is traceability. No one knows what that's going to look like. No one knows who pays for it. But I think that's going to be kind of a table stakes, if you will, to participate in this market in 5-10 years. And it goes to what Jeff's been talking about a lot, is data. I mean, data builds trust. And we are in a industry, it's the least digitized industry of the top 12, top 50 industries globally. It is going to get digitized. There is a computational wave that is coming. I think that will ultimately be the bridge to trust, in our opinion.
Yeah. I think the data allows you to track the provenance of the product. But before I came to SoftBank, I read this report. It was 120 global sectors and the prevalence of technology in those sectors. And most people would start at the top. I went to the bottom. And in the bottom 5 was education, agriculture, and real estate. And so I've been spending a lot of time in ed tech, ag tech, and prop tech. So,
Fantastic.
because the incumbents have gotten fat and happy, right? Part of that is governmental regulation, because some of those industries have a lot of safety concerns. And so governments have allowed for oligopolies to happen for scale and scope benefits. And these companies have been, the innovator's dilemma, and not really driving what the customer wants, but driving for profits and regulation. And now with the advent of technology, with AI, with ML, with big data, you're going to start to see many of these traditional companies be disintermediated over time as new upstarts are creating aspirational and trusted brands that go direct to the consumer, that provides transparency across the entire value chain.
Fantastic. Either of you guys want to jump in before we go to the...
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense of irony in the idea that we don't trust big food, but we trust young, authentic brands that probably have the least access to quality programs and transparency in their raw material sourcing. I'm constantly aware of that. That's probably based on a sense of belief in the conviction of entrepreneurship, right? Young people or older people are starting new brands, and they're putting everything on the line in order to build this business. And so there's an inherent trust of those leaders and those entrepreneurs. And when you look at some of the challenges that big food has right now, you think about the RX bar acquisition. All the quality issues that really occurred during that company were under the leadership of the founders. And it was when the company was acquired that a lot of that sort of came to fruition, because the standards of a large organization with Kellogg's really held the company to be more accountable and took them out of what is the realm of co-packers. And so I do think that we're clearly an investor in young, authentic brands. We believe that trust is a core part of building the businesses we invest in. But there is something to be said for a lot of the strategics in the space probably doing a better job, educating the consumers about the quality programs that they have and the conviction that they place in it. Because it's during these acquisitions that we really see a lot of the sort of infrastructure issues really, sort of come to light. And we see that those companies, some of the bigger issues on the supply chain are really sort of coming to the top of the stack in terms of being corrected.
Yeah, the monikers we put out there today they add almost no value, and I think are hurting the industry. I saw gluten-free shampoo the other day.
Yeah. For for us, our mission is to humanize consumables, and it's this. For us, trust equals transparency, and we don't want to be preachy about it, and obviously I live a certain way, and other people don't have to, but we want consumers to be able to make the choice. We want consumers to be able to see what's in it, know what that ingredient is, know what the purpose of that ingredient is, and then you can make the decision if you want to consume that or not.
Like the donut bar outside.
Like the donut bar.
Like the Coca-Cola.
There's far too many products across the entire spectrum of CPG where 99% of consumers don't know what 90% of the ingredients in that thing actually do. And I think part of it's education, and I think part of it is transparency. And if people want to consume garbage, that's their prerogative, but they should know that that's garbage they're consuming. And if they want to consume much cleaner label items, we should empower consumers to make those decisions, and we should have some standards that allow them to do that.
And I do think here, one of the things that's occurred is supply chain's now marketing a little bit because, to your point on transparency, it's also translucency. It's like, I'm going to take market share from you because I'm going to tell you what I'm about. And I'm going to invite you in. I'm going to tell you where it came from farming-wise. It's I think the era of translucency married with sort of against this lack of transparency. So I think what consumers, maybe to your original question on trust, is I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my manufacturing process, my sourcing, where it comes from. It may not have the quality standards of a large multinational that has QC QA people, but I'm going to be a little bit more open. And I think that's maybe causing this arbitrage of trust.
But so then you make it a communications issue.
Right.
Yeah, well, and there's, I think, we consumers, myself included, we're simple, and we want simple heuristics that help us.
100 calories, 28 servings per bag, 100 calories.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about my bag over there, which has a couple RX bars in it, and after I did my Whole30, it became my staple, and I'm probably, my LTV is going to be insane because it's just simple for ingredients, etc. Anyway, so let's go out to the audience. Dave has been very patient.
I love the conversation. I'd like to hear whether you guys are looking at companies that are similar to maybe doing financial engineering and education, so income sharing agreements, really connecting the value of education with the value of skills.
Wondering whether you guys are looking at companies that take financial engineering approach to food production and consumption along with savings in health and medical costs. So as an example, would you fund a company that would pay people to become vegetarians if it provided reduced medical costs and captured that maybe by providing, life insurance or healthcare insurance directly to recapture those costs?
Yeah, I could talk to that. We're looking at a handful of companies that fit that profile, and I'd sort of separate the question. I think there's a lot of opportunity for financial engineering within smaller, rapidly growing CPG companies because many of the founders are not as financially savvy as some of the investors up on this panel. And so there's actually a lot of easy opportunity to add value through sharing of resources, through creating synergies between companies, et cetera. Your second question, which was, are there other ways to value companies other than sort of simple profit metrics? And this was something we talked about yesterday in our Food Leaders Retreat. I believe there are. I think we're starting to move in a direction, and I'm very optimistic because for the first time we're seeing it coming up, and Congressman Ryan was actually at our Food Leaders Retreat yesterday, and he's actually thinking about this, which is there's other stakeholders in a company, and can you penalize companies for behaving badly and reward companies for doing things that actually help in ways that aren't easily quantified by the bottom line? And the answer is yes. And
Class action lawsuits against sugar, carb, and meat producers.
have I considered that?
Would you consider it for purely financial reasons?
I'm not really a class action type of guy. I do believe in punishment, though, in terms of taxation. I do think companies that are selling things that are proven to lead to higher healthcare costs, higher chronic disease, higher obesity rates. There are many, many countries that have implemented a sugar tax.
Tax people are basically covered by the people who are causing the problem. The lobbyists for those taxations, food lobbies, medical,
Well, the biggest challenge of this country, which when I alluded to France and Italy, is that the lobbying effort on food here is too big, and it's a problem. And it's causing many policymakers to not be objective about what's actually happening. It turns out that most chronic diseases actually can be reversed through diet. 90% of type 2 diabetes can be reversed with a Mediterranean or a paleo diet if adhered to, and you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on pharmaceuticals and insulin. And there are some insurance companies who are starting to lead the way. Kaiser Permanente and John Hancock are starting to actually reduce premiums, starting to fund food. Imagine that you go to a doctor and instead of him giving you a prescription for a pill, he gives you a prescription to eat the paleo diet. We're getting there because it actually works. And it really upsets some Western trained doctors, but it's remarkable, and it doesn't get enough press because there's no one to profit off of it. But it works.
And for what it's worth, the intellectually intriguing approach, but there are probably incredibly simple ways to just get people to make some small incremental changes, subsidizing meals on DoorDash that fit a particular profile, making food slightly more satiating that shows up just in time from wherever you're ordering from, helping people recognize when they make these small changes that they feel better. Sometimes I think we get too fancy in how we drive change. This is one of those categories where starting to feel good feeds on itself, and so I'm always looking in my investing for how we find those incremental moments.
So we talked a lot about the lack of innovation in the food system, and I think one place where there's been almost no innovation is in the way we produce animal products. So it's done largely the same way it was done 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. And there's a new crop of companies called cellular agriculture companies, which are basically using biology directly to make products that we typically make through animals. And I'm wondering how disruptive you think that field is going to be for the food space.
So yeah, we've got an investment in that area, and we're tracking that area. I've gone from a skeptic to less of a skeptic. I think we're looking for is cost per kg. Can you get it below 50? If you're doing chicken nuggets, your inclusion rate's 10%. You got to get even lower. And then, is the manufacturing process scalable at sub 50? It's got to be below 50. I think it should be 10. And then 2, regulatory. I think what the U.S. has done has provided a lot more. They're on their way to providing more clarity. And then 3, and probably the most important, is how do you get consumers to want to, buy it. And I'm not sure that the consumer of cellular meat is necessarily in America.
That's right.
I think it could be somewhere else.
And as part of that, how do you get consumers to buy it? It starts with, does it taste good, right? And then do you romance the brand beyond the technology? Because people don't want to put technology in their body. And I think if you look around the world, there's a shortage of land, labor, water, energy, and arable land, right? And there's 1.7 billion people around the world today that are undernourished out of 7.4 billion in world population. Americans make up about 4% of the world population. We consume 44% of all fruits and vegetables. And so I do think there will be adoption out of necessity out of emerging nations that will set the pattern that will then get exported back to the U.S. over time.
We think this is a black swan. One of our companies, Future Meat, has a feed conversion ratio today of 0.4. I mean, that's nuts if you track animal protein. And they're not yet where they want to be on cost, but it seems like it's one of these things that if it happens, it's going to have tremendous unintended consequence, both positive and negative.
I think there's a huge opportunity for technology, but I think we have to be very thoughtful and measured about what we're creating. There's generally unintended consequences with everything. And when you're growing meat in a petri dish, there's a lot of questions about what you're missing that I don't know the answer. I don't know when a cow is raised or a chicken is raised. There are things we can't measure, and there's an arrogance of science to assume that if we can't measure it, then maybe it doesn't exist. And I think we've learned over time that there's lots of things that we don't know exist still. And I think that the challenge of technology is we have to stay rooted in foundational principles without overreaching too early, because the unintended consequences are certainly something I don't want to be the guinea pig to figure out.
quick one on traceability. Do you have examples of companies or others who are leading the way in terms of provenance and on blockchain?
And I think we've got a couple investments there. One is called Safe Traces. It's edible, very, very low cost DNA. There's a number of other companies that compete with them. I think why we invest in them is, I think in blockchain, because it's a physical commodity that the calories, we needed a bridge between the digital and the physical. So that's why we're looking at those investments. I think the provenance from an ROI perspective is food recalls. I think that will be the thing that a lot of grocers are looking to how do you do. There's always going to be food recalls. I mean, even if you have the best food safety, how do you do them quicker? How do you do them with more efficacy? I think overall, though, we actually this morning in our Monday morning meeting call had a debate on blockchain because we don't really know how blockchain is going to evolve in the sector. It is going to there's more traceability that's going to be predominant in the sector, I think. But would Walmart share Amazon's blockchain? I mean, it's going to be hard because these are sophisticated databases, right? And how are you going to get portability? How are you going to get sort of standardization?
Yeah. What's interesting is Plenty has the ultimate ability to track. I could tell you which growing track, which farm, which exactly pod, what was the nitrogen and hydrogen, what were the nutritional density, what was the energy in the light system, down to that leaf. But what's really interesting is you don't even have to wash Plenty lettuce because it's indoors. There are no bugs. There's no pesticides. Humans don't touch it. So it's interesting, like through the data, we could track it down to the individual leaf, and it may not matter.
So we have, I think, time for one, maybe two questions, 5 minutes.
Great. I'm curious where you think climate change ranks among consumer preferences, and are there promising innovations along the kind of companies you're talking about where you can accomplish multiple objectives, where you can mitigate climate change and also meet kind of consumers' more heterogeneous preferences?
Yeah, if you look at people's around the world, not just the U.S., there's a lot of concern about climate change, and what we're really talking about is a multidisciplinary approach to solving many of these issues. So we talked about food as medicine, right, which lowers healthcare costs. We talked about things like Beyond Meat, Impossible, Memphis Meat, that you don't need to spend a lot of time growing corn to feed the animals, right? And so that has a lower carbon footprint. If you're building it in a lab, and cows are not good for the environment from CO2 emissions. If you talk about Plenty, you're growing indoors with 1% of the water and in 25% of the time, and so you're getting higher utility out of it. So these things are all connected, and the challenge for us is investors often are segment focused, and governmental departments it's the USDA and the Agriculture Department, it's Health and Human Services and the CDC, and it's different departments. And what we need is more of a global interdisciplinary approach to tackle these, and this is why I think forums like Milken and Davos are really powerful to bring people from different discourse communities together to try to solve what is really a full stack solution with a lot of interconnectedness. So consumers do care, but at the end of the day, it's not the consumer sitting in this room, right? I grew up on welfare and food stamps, and we cried ourselves to sleep because we didn't have enough food. And I remember 5 years ago when one of my 3 teenage boys asked me, "Dad, why are poor people fat?" He didn't understand. And so it's not us about, like, at the end of the day, if you have to feed your children or you're going to take care of the environment, you're going to feed your children. Mm-hmm. And so, again, this is another component, which is income equality and education and opportunity. So there's no one solution, which is why it's very difficult to make progress.
And I think this industry is uniquely placed. Global emissions, ag and food, are 24% in the U.S. as an example. But one of the things I think this industry is uniquely placed to do in the climate change debate is carbon sequestration. If you adhere to certain forms of farming, and where we've started a platform in this area, is you can actually either be carbon neutral or carbon sequester carbon. It allows you to have a systematic view of how you deliver inputs. But we actually think, it's one of the things that animates us. I think if you look at the Paris Accords, the number one industry was CPG, actually. If you look at Paul Hawking's book, Drawdown, 8 out of the top 20 are food and ag related. And if you're allocating the sector, I think there's opportunities where you can actually potentially even reverse it and sequester carbon, depending on it. It's still how you measure it and how you think about production of it. But this could be part of the solution, not just reducing the problem.
I'll add just one less optimistic point, which is everyone cares, but if it doesn't taste good, they don't buy it. And that's actually really important, particularly in this industry, is that there's a lot of very mission-driven people who produce really horrible tasting products that people just don't buy. And so there has to be a commerciality to your mission-driven approach, where the first thing people do is they taste it. And if it doesn't taste good, they won't buy it.
Short question over there?
I can give you a short question.
Okay.
It's just, GMO only hit like 2 crops. And the new gene editing is going to hit every crop, and so there's going to be a revolution in agriculture as these traits go across the world in each of these traits. I'm just probably too long a question. How do you see that as you you don't see much about the world changing as
Questions about gene editing?
and the fact that it can hit every crop now, wheat, rice, they're all going to have the ability to have traits because of the new technology, and every country is going to start to accept it. And we just don't really have a dialogue on what we care about.
Jordan, do you have anything on gene editing?
I don't have anything on gene editing. I think that we do have a labeling crisis that is going on right now, and I think that there's a lot of standardization issues in terms of, in general, how we're labeling our foods. But not in gene editing. So I'll let that probably, Sanjeev, do you? Sanjeev,
We do have a ban in gene editing called bans. We're constructive on it. I think GMO has largely been debated, but there's intragenic versus intragenic, intergenic. We're, Mendelian genetics, which we've done for, centuries, have been Mendelian. I mean, it's been, intragenic genetics.
Basically crossbreeding.
Exactly. And we think that there's ways to do that for nutrition and health. And so one of the areas that we're focusing Benson on is medical foods. Is can we come out with the first food that's reimbursed and from either health insurers or public financiers like Medicare? And we think that's a way to get consumer buy-in, because we actually take GMOs in the form of vaccines in many ways, but food for the longest time is seen as a commodity, and I think that's where the GMO debate got lost, was in that commodity. But if you actually give a consumer benefit, either in the form of flavor or health, we think there could be some social license gained by that technology.
I'm going to wrap it up with 10 seconds from each of you on what makes you the most optimistic about this topic to leave everyone on a positive, non-edited note.
This has been such an inspirational 2 days for me. I mean, I think sometimes I'm in the little box of building brands. And so it's really exciting to sit and come and hear all these amazing food leaders talk about policy and talk about how, they're going to now have a platform to run for president thinking about food policy. I mean, that was a pretty incredible thing yesterday. I do, on an inspirational thought, I've never seen so much activation in an industry where all of the most senior, sort of leaders in this space, from multinationals and retailers, are saying it's time to prioritize healthier, better quality products. And so, as much as it's very easy for us to sit and to say, well, we've got traceability issues, or we've got labeling issues, or wherever else, to isolate all of these challenges and to think about the technology solutions that are available, it's very simple. Americans are eating better food, and they're going to increasingly be eating better food because the retailers have opened up more shelf space. So even as much as we could sit and talk about direct-to-consumer channels, what we're seeing from our vantage point is that 5 years from now, the products that we grew up eating will not exist on shelf. It will either be that the multinationals have innovated their holdings, and those incumbent brands are now have been reformulated to be healthier and better for you, or these young, authentic brands will have taken that shelf space. And so if you think about, we sit here and I make a joke about Coca-Cola here, there's a generation of children who don't know soda exists. It's not part of their diet. And so we should be really encouraged by some very basic things, which are better quality products are coming to market. They are being funded, they are being bought, and we should feel encouraged by the fact that it is going to look different in 5-10 years from now.
Please don't take my Lucky Charms away.
Sorry, my daughter doesn't even know Lucky Charms exist.
You're a better parent. So what's exciting for me is we're having the dialogue. And if you look at $7 billion into ag tech in the last 5 years, $2 billion last year alone, and we need to solve for an increase of 70% in food output by 2050. And it's not going to come from traditional ways. There's just not enough land. There's not enough of the right climate. There's not enough affordable energy. So technology is going to drive the human need because we eat 4 to 5 times a day. And so I'm excited to be part of the conversation and part of the solution in helping to fund the next generation of entrepreneurs who are going to use technology to do good while doing well.
Wonderful.
What's exciting for me is that it's very personal. When I started eating this way out of necessity in 2002, 2003, I was a freak. And people thought of me as a freak, and people would ridicule, eating this type of way. And now you have people like Tom Brady and LeBron James who eat this way, and these are public heroes. And now it's lauded, and it's something that I think the dominoes have fallen and the tide has turned. And now this is accepted that eating healthier is actually something that is heroic and something that you should actually be selfish about and be proud of.
I think what's exciting is actually, I think there's only scope to grow. I think we did this analysis of venture capitalists say disruption a lot. We define it as changes in market share. We looked at what industries changed the most in market share the last 25 years. The R coefficient that we found that was the highest correlation was the digitalization of the channel. And this industry hasn't even yet digitized yet. Grocery is 8% in the US, perhaps going to higher. Ag is even lower, I think 1 or 2%. And so all of this disruption, changes in market share happening without even the digitalization that you talked about. And I think that this is all happening before that happens. So we think there's going to be a significant opportunity for small companies, entrepreneurs to take share as the channel gets digitized.
Well, please join me in thanking these panelists before you head to the donut bar. That's why I had my third daughter, to have donuts.